The smoke never cleared anymore. 3 months had passed since the Velkari ships first appeared in Earth's sky, and Seoul still burned. Minji Park pressed her back against the crumbled concrete wall and listened for the sound of alien patrol craft. The low humming noise meant death for anyone caught in the open. She counted to 10, then peered around the corner. The street stretched empty before her, filled with twisted metal and broken glass. Shop signs hung at strange angles, their Korean letters barely readable through the soot. A car sat upside down in the middle of the road, its windows blown out long ago. "Clear," she whispered into her radio. 3 figures emerged from the shadows behind her. Juno Kim moved first, his marine training still evident in how he checked every corner. Behind him came Hye-in Lee, clutching a worn backpack filled with scavenged electronics. Dae-hyun Cho brought up the rear, his eyes constantly scanning the sky for patrol ships. They needed food. The underground shelter that housed 43 survivors had been running low for days. Minji had volunteered for the supply run because she knew the city better than most. Before the invasion, she had been a delivery driver. Now those same streets were her hunting ground. The group moved quickly through the rubble. Every step had to be calculated. The Velkari had placed sensors throughout the city, small devices that detected human movement. Step on one and you had maybe 2 minutes before their soldiers arrived. There. Junho pointed to a half-collapsed convenience store. Might be something left, Minji nodded. She had checked this store before, but new supplies sometimes appeared when people fled their homes. The Velkari seemed to enjoy watching humans scurry around looking for scraps. It amused them. They reached the store without triggering any sensors. The front wall had been blown away by alien weapons, leaving the interior exposed. Shelves lay scattered across the floor, but Hye-in immediately went to work pulling canned goods from the wreckage. "Rice," she said, holding up a torn bag. "Half of it spilled, but we can use the rest." Dae-hyun found medical supplies behind the pharmacy counter. Bandages and antibiotics. The old man with the broken leg will need these. While the others gathered supplies, Minji climbed through the debris to reach the store's back office. Sometimes store owners left emergency supplies in hidden places. She pushed aside fallen ceiling tiles and found a small metal box under the desk. Inside were protein bars, water purification tablets, and something unexpected. A small radio still working. She switched it on and kept the volume low. Static filled the air, then a voice broke through. It was broadcasting in English, but the accent sounded Asian. Maybe Chinese or Japanese. "This is Captain Chen broadcasting from Sector 7. Any survivors in the Hong Kong area? We have established a safe zone in the old subway tunnels. We have food and medical supplies. Do not trust Velkari promises of safety. They are lies." Minji's heart jumped. Other people were still fighting back. She quickly turned the dial, searching for more broadcasts. Most frequencies carried only static or Velkari propaganda, but she found 3 more human voices. One from somewhere in Europe, one from what sounded like North America, and another Asian voice she could not identify. "Minji." Junho's voice came from below. "We need to move. Patrol ship approaching from the east." She grabbed the radio and climbed down quickly. The humming sound was getting louder. They had perhaps 30 seconds before the Velkari ship would be close enough to detect them. The 4 survivors ran through the back of the store and into the alley beyond. Yunho led them through a path he had memorized, jumping from shadow to shadow. The patrol ship passed overhead, its searchlight cutting through the smoke like a blade. They reached the entrance to the underground tunnels without being seen. The heavy metal door had been disguised to look like collapsed rubble, but it opened easily from the inside. They slipped through and sealed it behind them. The tunnel system had been part of Seoul's old infrastructure, abandoned years before the invasion. Now it served as home to the largest group of survivors in the sector. As they walked deeper underground, battery-powered lights showed the way. "Any luck?" asked an old woman named Mrs. Pak as they entered the main chamber. "Some," Dae-hyun replied, showing the medical supplies. And Minji found something interesting. The main chamber had been converted into a living space. Families slept on makeshift beds created from salvaged furniture. A small kitchen area used portable stoves to heat food. Children played quiet games in the corners, having learned that loud noises attracted attention even underground. Colonel Sang-ho-yoon approached them from across the chamber. He had been a South Korean military officer before the invasion, and now served as their unofficial leader. His uniform was dirty and torn, but he still carried himself like a soldier. "Report," he said simply. "The sector above is still heavily patrolled," Junho replied, "but we found supplies in this." He gestured to Minji, who held up the radio. "Working radio," Yoon said, his eyes lighting up. "What did you hear?" "Other survivors," Minji said. "Multiple groups, different countries. They are still broadcasting, still fighting." Yoon took the radio and began scanning frequencies. After several minutes, he found a broadcast in Korean. The voice belonged to someone claiming to be a South Korean Navy officer. "Broadcasting from Busan. We have established contact with Japanese self-defense forces and Chinese resistance groups," the voice said. "The Velkari occupation is not as complete as they want us to believe. Military units worldwide are still operational and coordinating resistance activities." The news spread quickly through the chamber. For 3 months, the survivors had believed they were alone. The Velkari had made sure their propaganda broadcasts emphasized human defeat and the futility of resistance. But the radio proved otherwise. "Colonel," Hyarin said, approaching with her laptop, "I have been working on something. The Velkari communication devices we salvaged from that crashed patrol ship. I think I can modify them to intercept their transmissions." Yoon raised an eyebrow. "You can understand their language?" "No, but their communication systems use mathematical patterns I recognize. If I can decode their transmission protocols, we might be able to listen to their tactical communications, maybe even learn their patrol schedules." "Do it," Yoon said immediately. As Hyarin began working on the alien technology, Minji sat down near the radio and continued scanning frequencies. Each new voice she found represented hope. Humanity was down but not defeated. Late that night, as most of the survivors slept, she picked up a transmission that made her blood run cold. It was in English, but the voice sounded different. "Mechanical and emotionless. Attention human resistance groups," the voice said. "This is Velkari Command. Your continued defiance only delays the inevitable. In 7 standard days, we will begin final pacification protocols. Surrender now, and some of your kind will be permitted to live as laborers. Continue your resistance and your species will be eliminated entirely. You have been warned." The transmission repeated 3 times, then cut to static. Minji looked around the chamber at the sleeping families. The children, the old people who had survived 3 months of alien occupation. The Velkari thought humans would surrender when faced with extinction. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. 6 months had passed since the Velkari invasion, and everything had changed. The underground shelter beneath Seoul now connected to 5 other hideouts through a network of tunnels that Junho and his team had spent weeks digging. What started as 43 survivors had grown to nearly 200 people. Minji crouched in the communication room that Hyarin had built from salvaged alien technology. 3 months of careful work had turned the small chamber into the nerve center of their resistance cell. Screens flickered with intercepted Velkari transmissions, while modified radios crackled with messages from human survivors across the globe. "Report from Tokyo sector," she read aloud to Colonel Yoon. "Japanese resistance has successfully disrupted 3 Velkari supply convoys this week. They are requesting technical specifications for the communication jammers we developed." Yoon nodded as he studied a hand-drawn map of Seoul. Red marks showed Velkari patrol patterns, while blue marks indicated safe routes between resistance hideouts. The map had taken months to create, with each mark representing lives risked to gather intelligence. "Send them the specifications," he said, "and ask if they have made progress on decoding Velkari tactical frequencies." The communication network had become their greatest weapon. While the Velkari had expected isolated pockets of survivors to slowly give up hope, they found instead that human resistance groups were learning from each other faster than alien forces could adapt. Hyarin looked up from her workstation where she was examining a captured Velkari datapad. "Colonel, I think I found something important. This device contains patrol schedules for the entire Asian sector, but there is something strange about the patterns." She brought up a display showing Velkari movement across multiple countries. "Look at this. 3 months ago, they had regular patterns. Same routes, same timing, very predictable. But now their patrols are random and much more frequent." "They are afraid," Junho said from the tunnel entrance. He had just returned from a reconnaissance mission, and his clothes were covered in sewer mud. "I watched a Velkari patrol today. 6 soldiers instead of the usual 3, and they jumped at every shadow. Colonel Yoon studied the patrol data more carefully. Hiren, can you show me casualty reports from their transmissions? She worked quickly, pulling up intercepted alien communications from the past month. The data was fragmentary because the Velkari used heavy encryption, but Hiren had learned to decode basic status reports. Their casualties are increasing every week, she said with surprise in her voice. Not just from direct attacks. They are losing soldiers to accidents, equipment failures, and what they call psychological stress incidents. Minji understood what that meant. The Velkari were not used to fighting an enemy that never stopped learning and adapting. Every human resistance group studied alien tactics and found new ways to exploit their weaknesses. The psychological pressure was breaking their soldiers. There is more, Hiren continued. I intercepted a communication between their sole command and their homeworld. They are requesting additional forces and new equipment designed specifically for urban warfare. New equipment means they admit their current methods are failing, Colonel Yoon said. How long before these reinforcements arrive? The transmission was partially corrupted, but I estimate between 4 and 6 months. Daehyun entered the communication room, carrying a large bag filled with electronic components. He had become their primary scavenger, finding everything from computer parts to medical supplies in the ruins above ground. I have news from the surface, he said. The Velkari are building something in the city center. Large construction project with heavy security. Dozens of their transport ships coming and going every day. Colonel Yoon frowned. Construction? What kind? Unknown. But whatever it is, they do not want humans to see it. They have tripled patrols around the area and installed new sensor networks. Minji had an idea. I could get close enough to observe. My delivery routes before the invasion took me through that area. I know every building and alley. Too dangerous, Junho objected. If they are increasing security, they must be expecting reconnaissance attempts. That is exactly why we need to know what they are building, Colonel Yoon said. But not a solo mission. Take a team. 3 days later, Minji found herself crawling through a drainage pipe beneath Seoul's business district. Yoonho followed close behind, while Hiren monitored their progress from the underground base using a modified radio system. The drainage system had been damaged during the initial invasion, creating new passages that did not appear on Velkari maps. It was dangerous work, but it allowed them to move undetected through areas that would otherwise be impossible to reach. They emerged from the drainage system 6 blocks from the construction site. The area looked completely different from what Minji remembered. The Velkari had demolished entire city blocks to create a large open space where alien machinery worked continuously. Through her binoculars, she could see the construction was not a building. It was a massive communication array, far larger and more complex than anything the Velkari had built before. Tall metal towers stretched toward the sky while alien technicians worked to install equipment she did not recognize. Hiren, are you receiving this? She whispered into her radio as Junho recorded everything with a salvaged camera. Yes, I can see the video feed. This is not standard Velkari communication equipment. The power requirements alone suggest they are planning to broadcast across multiple star systems. They observed for 2 hours, documenting everything they could see. Velkari soldiers patrolled the perimeter in groups of 6, their weapons ready and their behavior nervous. These were not the confident conquerors from 6 months ago. As they prepared to leave, Minji noticed something that made her blood cold. In a heavily guarded area near the center of the construction site, alien technicians were installing what looked like execution platforms. They are not just building a communication array, she reported to Colonel Yoon after they returned to base. They are preparing for mass executions. Public ones. The colonel studied their photographs and video recordings. A show of force. They want to broadcast human executions across their empire to demonstrate their continued control of Earth. But they would not need such elaborate preparations unless they were planning something very large, Hiren observed. This array could reach every human settlement on the planet simultaneously. The implications were clear. The Velkari were planning a final solution to the human resistance problem. They intended to execute resistance leaders publicly and broadcast it to break the spirit of survivors everywhere. We need to warn the other resistance groups, Minji said. Already working on it, Hiren replied, typing rapidly at her communication station. But we need to do more than warn them. We need to capture one of their communication officers and learn the full scope of their plans. Colonel Yoon smiled grimly. Then we go hunting. 2 weeks later, their opportunity came. Intelligence from the Tokyo Resistance indicated that a high-ranking Velkari communication specialist named Lieutenant Velkon would be inspecting the Sol array. The capture mission required perfect timing and coordination between multiple resistance cells. As Velkon's transport approached the construction site, human fighters struck simultaneously at 6 different locations across the city, drawing Velkari forces away from the central area. Minji and Junho waited in the tunnels directly beneath the communication array. When Velkon's small escort passed over their position, they struck fast and hard. Explosive charges disabled the alien transport while resistance fighters armed with captured Velkari weapons overwhelmed the guards. Lieutenant Velkon survived the attack and found himself dragged into the underground tunnels before reinforcements could arrive. For the first time since the invasion began, humans had captured a high-ranking Velkari officer alive. The interrogation revealed information that changed everything. The mass execution plan was real, but it was also an act of desperation. Reports to the Velkari homeworld described human resistance as unlike anything they had encountered in centuries of conquest. "Your species does not behave as it should," Velkon said during questioning. "Other races surrender when faced with superior force. Others seek negotiation. Humans become more dangerous when threatened." The most shocking revelation came when Velkon described reports being sent to other worlds under Velkari control. The Empire's reputation was built on swift, decisive conquest. Earth's continued resistance was inspiring rebellion on planets that had been subjugated for generations. "The High Command believes that eliminating human resistance leaders will restore order," Velkon explained. "If Earth falls completely, other worlds will lose hope." But Colonel Yoon saw the situation differently. If Earth continues to resist, other worlds will find courage. The resistance had 60 days before the mass executions were scheduled to begin. 60 days to turn the hunters into the hunted. Sergeant Thekvar stood on the platform overlooking Seoul's main square and felt satisfied with his work. The massive communication array behind him was nearly complete, its towers reaching toward the gray sky like metal claws. In 2 days, the entire galaxy would watch as human resistance leaders met their end. He had been promoted after his success in breaking human morale during the early months of occupation. The Velkari High Command believed his understanding of human psychology made him the perfect choice to oversee the final pacification operation. Below him, thousands of humans had been forced to gather in the square. Velkari soldiers with energy weapons kept them in neat rows, ensuring perfect camera angles for the galactic broadcast. The executions would begin at dawn, starting with the most important prisoners. Thekvar touched the communication device on his belt. "Status report on the primary target. Colonel Sang-Ho Yoon is secured in holding Cell 7, came the reply. The human remains defiant but shows signs of physical deterioration. The capture of Colonel Yoon had taken weeks of careful planning. Velkari intelligence had finally identified the leader of Seoul's resistance network and tracked him to one of their hidden bases. The raid had cost them 12 soldiers, but capturing the human commander would be worth the price. What Thekvar did not know was that Colonel Yoon had allowed himself to be captured, 3 levels beneath the city square. Minji Park checked her equipment one final time. The utility tunnels under this area had been mapped months ago, and every resistance fighter knew their exact position relative to the execution platform above. "Communication check," she whispered into her radio. "Junho here. Demolition charges are in position. Velkari reinforcement routes will be blocked on your signal. High Aaron reporting. Their communication systems will go down exactly 60 seconds after you give the word. Daehyun ready with evacuation teams. Civilian escape routes are clear." Minji smiled grimly. The Velkari believed they were demonstrating their power by forcing humans to watch executions. They had no idea that every human in that crowd was part of the resistance network. It had taken months to prepare for this moment. Every person in the square had a role to play. Teachers would protect children during the chaos. Former police officers would direct crowd movement. Doctors would treat the wounded. Soldiers would fight. The Velkari had made a fatal mistake. They thought public executions would break human spirit. Instead, they had created the perfect opportunity for the largest coordinated resistance action in the occupation's history. Above ground, Sergeant Thekvar began his prepared speech. The translation devices carried his words to the crowd in Korean, English, Chinese, and other human languages. Today marks the end of human defiance, he announced. Your leaders will die, and with them any hope of resistance. Submit to Velkari rule, and some of you may live to serve. The crowd remained silent, but Thekvar saw something in their faces that disturbed him. Where he expected fear or despair, he saw something else. Anticipation. Colonel Yoon was brought onto the platform in chains. His uniform was torn and dirty, but he walked with his head high. When the guards forced him to his knees, he looked directly at Thekvar without flinching. Any final words before your execution? Thekvar asked. Colonel Yoon smiled. Yes, you should have killed us all 6 months ago. At that moment, the carefully planned operation began. Hieron's virus hit the Velkari communication systems like a digital plague. Security cameras went dark. Communication between patrols failed, and the sensors monitoring the crowd malfunctioned simultaneously. The aliens found themselves blind and deaf at the worst possible moment. Junho's demolition charges destroyed 3 major intersections, trapping Velkari reinforcements in distant parts of the city. Secondary explosions collapsed tunnel entrances that the aliens had been using to move troops undetected. Minji and her assault team emerged from the utility tunnels directly beneath the execution platform. They had studied the platform's construction for weeks and knew exactly where to place their charges for maximum effect. The explosion lifted the entire platform 6 feet into the air before it crashed back down in pieces. Velkari guards were thrown in all directions while Colonel Yoon, protected by a human shield formation, was quickly freed from his chains. But the real surprise was not the rescue operation. It was what happened next. Instead of fleeing in panic as the Velkari expected, the crowd of forced observers became an army. Hidden weapons appeared from beneath clothing. Makeshift body armor emerged from backpacks. The humans who had seemed helpless and defeated moments before revealed themselves as trained resistance fighters. Sergeant Thekvar found himself surrounded by enemies where he had expected to find victims. His communication device was dead. His reinforcements were trapped. His execution platform was destroyed, and thousands of humans were looking at him with expressions that promised violence. He drew his sidearm and fired wildly into the crowd, but human fighters with captured Velkari weapons returned fire with deadly accuracy. His bodyguards fell one by one as resistance fighters advanced from all directions. The battle for Seoul's main square lasted 37 minutes. When the smoke cleared, over 200 Velkari soldiers were dead or captured. Human casualties were surprisingly light because the resistance had spent months studying alien tactics and preparing countermeasures. Sergeant Thekvar survived the battle but found himself dragged into the same underground tunnels where Lieutenant Velkon was already being held. The hunter had become the prey. The communication array that was supposed to broadcast human executions instead carried a different message. Hieron had taken control of the system and was now broadcasting to every world under Velkari occupation. This is the Earth resistance, her voice carried across star systems. Seoul has not fallen. Korea has not fallen. Earth has not fallen. To all species under Velkari rule, we say this: resistance is not futile. It is necessary. The broadcast included video footage of the battle, showing Velkari soldiers retreating from human fighters. It showed captured alien officers being led away in chains. Most importantly, it showed that the supposedly invincible Velkari could be defeated. On 17 different worlds, species that had accepted Velkari rule for decades watched humans do the impossible. The psychological impact was greater than any military victory could have achieved. In the underground interrogation room, Sergeant Thekvar sat chained to a metal chair, while Colonel Yoon questioned him about Velkari fleet movements and reinforcement schedules. The alien's earlier confidence had completely disappeared. You cannot win, Thekvar said, but his voice lacked conviction. The Velkari Empire spans hundreds of worlds. Earth is nothing compared to our military might. Perhaps, Colonel Yoon replied calmly, but you made one critical error in your conquest strategy. What error? You assumed we would react like every other species you have conquered. Submit when threatened, negotiate when pressured, surrender when faced with superior force. The colonel leaned forward. Humans do not work that way. Thekvar remained silent, but his eyes showed growing fear. The reports he had sent to the Velkari homeworld over the past months had described increasingly desperate situations. Human resistance was growing stronger instead of weaker. Their tactics were evolving faster than Velkhari military doctrine could adapt. Other captured Velkhari officers had revealed during interrogation that Earth was becoming a problem for the entire empire. Resources that should have been used for new conquests were being diverted to deal with continued human resistance. Worse, other subjugated species were beginning to question Velkhari invincibility. The victory in Seoul was broadcast continuously for 3 days. Resistance groups around the world reported increased recruitment and successful operations against alien forces. The psychological tide of the war was turning. But the most important change was not visible to the Velkhari occupiers. In underground bases across Earth, human fighters were no longer talking about survival. They were planning conquest. 3 days after the battle, Minji sat in the communication room listening to reports from resistance groups worldwide. Tokyo had captured an entire Velkhari supply depot. New York had shot down 6 alien patrol craft in a single day. London had liberated 2 prison camps. The Velkhari are pulling back from forward positions, she reported to Colonel Yoon. They are consolidating their forces around major population centers and strategic installations. Defensive posture, the colonel observed. They are no longer hunting us. They are afraid we are hunting them. He was right. The hunters had become the hunted, and everyone knew it. Dr. Sohyun Han studied the Velkhari prisoner across the metal table and made notes on her clipboard. As a former military psychologist, she had interviewed hundreds of soldiers suffering from combat stress. But this was her first time examining an alien mind. Sergeant Thekvar sat in his restraints and refused to make eye contact. 3 weeks of captivity had changed him dramatically. The confident conqueror who had planned mass executions now jumped at sudden noises and showed signs of severe anxiety. "Tell me about your homeworld," Dr. Han said in a calm voice. The translation device converted her Korean into the alien language while rendering his responses in Korean for her to understand. "I have told you nothing useful," Tekvar replied, but his voice shook slightly. "Your primitive interrogation methods will not break Velkhari discipline." Dr. Han smiled. "I am not trying to break you, Sergeant. I am trying to understand you. There is a difference." The psychological study of captured Velkhari officers had revealed fascinating information about alien military doctrine and social structure. The Velkhari Empire was built on the assumption that they were naturally superior to all other species. Their entire identity depended on the belief that conquest was inevitable and resistance was futile. But Earth had shattered that belief system. For the first time in Velkhari history, they faced a species that became more dangerous when threatened. The psychological impact was devastating their military effectiveness. "Your people have conquered hundreds of worlds," Dr. Han continued. "How many of those species fought back effectively?" Tekvar remained silent, but his body language suggested the answer was troubling. Other captured officers had already revealed that most alien species followed predictable patterns during conquest. Initial resistance followed by negotiation, followed by eventual submission. The Velkhari had built their entire military strategy around this pattern. Humans refused to follow the pattern. In another part of the underground complex, Hiren worked frantically at her computer station. The captured Velkhari communication equipment had provided access to alien databases containing detailed information about the Empire's military structure and strategic planning. "Colonel," she called out as Yoon entered the room, "I have decoded another section of their strategic files. You need to see this." The data showed Velkhari fleet positions throughout their empire. More importantly, it revealed that significant forces were being diverted from other sectors to deal with Earth's continued resistance. "They have pulled 3 battle fleets from their expansion campaigns," Hiren explained. "Those fleets are now patrolling space around Earth to prevent human expansion beyond the planet." Colonel Yoon studied the tactical display. "They are treating Earth like a military threat rather than a conquered territory." "What else have you found?" "Communication intercepts between their military commanders and the homeworld government. The reports describe Earth as a strategic problem that is affecting their entire empire." She brought up translated excerpts from Velkhari military communications. The language was formal and difficult to understand, but the meaning was clear. Other subjugated species were asking questions about Velkhari invincibility. Some were beginning to resist occupation forces in ways they never had before. Earth has become an inspiration to other conquered peoples, Colonel Yoon realized. That is why they are so desperate to eliminate our resistance. The strategic situation was more complex than anyone had imagined. The Velkari Empire depended on the fear and submission of hundreds of conquered worlds. If those worlds began to believe that successful resistance was possible, the entire imperial structure could collapse. A communication alert interrupted their discussion. Junho's voice came through the radio from a forward observation post. Colonel, we have movement in the northern sector. Large Velkari formation heading toward the city center. How large? At least 200 soldiers with heavy equipment. They appear to be preparing for a major operation. Colonel Yoon made a quick decision. Minji, prepare your reconnaissance team. I want to know what they are planning. 2 hours later, Minji crouched on the roof of a damaged apartment building and watched through binoculars as Velkari forces established a perimeter around a large government building that had survived the initial invasion. Their movements suggested they were preparing to defend the position rather than attack something. They are fortifying, she reported through her radio. Heavy weapons, energy barriers, the works. Whatever is in that building, they really do not want us to get near it. Through her scope, she could see alien technicians installing equipment on the building's roof. The devices looked like communication arrays, but smaller and more sophisticated than anything the Velkari had used before. New equipment, she observed. Definitely not standard occupation gear. Hiren's voice crackled through the radio from the underground base. Minji, I am picking up new electromagnetic signatures from your location. The equipment they are installing appears to be a long-range communication system designed for deep space transmission. The implications were clear. The Velkari were preparing to call for help. They are requesting reinforcements from the homeworld, Colonel Yoon concluded after reviewing Minji's report. The question is how much time we have before those reinforcements arrive. Dr. Han provided the answer during her next session with Sergeant Tekvar. The alien's psychological condition had deteriorated further, and he was becoming more willing to talk about things that frightened him. The main battle fleet, he said during questioning. It comes when the situation becomes impossible to control through normal methods. How long does it take for the fleet to travel from your homeworld to Earth? Tekvar hesitated, clearly struggling with military discipline versus his growing fear of human capabilities. 6 months, he finally admitted. Maybe less if they use the emergency hyperspace routes. The timeline gave the resistance a critical advantage. They had 6 months to prepare for the arrival of the main Velkari battle fleet. 6 months to transform from scattered resistance groups into a unified military force capable of challenging alien space power. But first, they had to prevent the Velkari from sending their distress call. The assault on the government building required coordination between resistance cells across the entire city. Yunho led demolition teams that would disable Velkari heavy weapons. Daehyun coordinated civilian evacuation from the surrounding area. Hiren prepared electronic warfare systems to jam alien communications. Minji would lead the primary assault team into the building itself, Theo. Attack began at dawn with synchronized strikes on Velkari. Positions throughout Seoul, the aliens had expected a direct assault on their fortified position, but the resistance had learned to think tactically. Instead of attacking the strongest point, they hit everywhere else simultaneously. Velkari forces found themselves under attack from 6 different directions, while their communication systems were jammed by human electronic warfare. Reinforcements called from other sectors never arrived, because resistance fighters had destroyed the roads and bridges they needed to travel. Minji's assault team used the chaos to approach the government building through the old subway tunnels that connected to its basement. They emerged behind Velkari lines and fought their way up through the building floor by floor. The alien communication equipment was on the roof, guarded by their best soldiers. The battle was fierce in close quarters, with both sides using captured weapons from previous engagements. But human fighters had advantages that the Velkari could not match. They knew the building's layout better than the occupiers. They understood urban warfare tactics developed over centuries of human conflict. Most importantly, they were fighting to prevent their planet's destruction, while the aliens were fighting to maintain an occupation that was already failing. Minji reached the roof first and found herself face to face with the Velkari communication officer, trying desperately to complete his transmission to the homeworld fleet. She shot him before he could finish entering the coordinates that would bring massive reinforcements to Earth. The victory was complete, but it came with a terrifying realization. As Hiren examined the captured communication equipment, she discovered that the distress call had been partially transmitted before being cut off. The homeworld fleet knows something is wrong, she reported to Colonel Hyun. They may not have Earth's exact coordinates, but they know their occupation forces are in trouble. Colonel Yoon studied the intercepted alien files that showed the size and power of the Valkyrie main battle fleet. Hundreds of ships, millions of soldiers, weapons capable of destroying entire cities from orbit. How long before they find us? He asked. Hard to say. Without the exact coordinates, they will have to search multiple star systems. But when they do find Earth, Hiren's voice trailed off. The implication was clear. The Resistance had won a crucial victory by preventing the immediate arrival of reinforcements. But somewhere in deep space, the most powerful military force in Valkyrie history was now searching for Earth. When they found it, the real war would begin. In his cell, Sergeant Thekvar heard the news of the failed transmission through conversations between his guards. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. "You have only delayed the inevitable," he told Dr. Han during their next session. The main fleet. 3 months had passed since the failed Valkyrie distress call, and the words had spread across every resistance network on Earth. When Sergeant Thekvar had screamed his threat about the coming fleet and planetary destruction, Minji Park's response had become the rally cry of human defiance. When does it start? Those 4 words were now whispered in underground bunkers from Tokyo to London. They were carved into the walls of hidden bases in every major city. They were the last thing Valkyrie soldiers heard before human fighters struck from the shadows. Colonel Yoon stood in what had once been the Seoul Metro maintenance facility and marveled at what desperate humans could accomplish. The vast underground space had been converted into a shipyard, where captured Valkyrie technology was being reverse-engineered and improved upon by teams of engineers, scientists and technicians from around the world. "Status report," he called out to Hiren, who was coordinating the technical teams from a platform overlooking the construction area. "The first prototype is nearly complete," she replied, pointing to a sleek craft that looked like a hybrid of human and alien design. "We have combined Valkyrie propulsion systems with human computer technology and weapons design. It should be faster and more maneuverable than anything in their fleet." The ship was smaller than standard Valkyrie vessels, but that was intentional. Human military doctrine emphasized speed and adaptability over raw firepower. They would use swarm tactics and superior maneuverability to overcome the enemy's numerical advantage. "How many ships can we build in the remaining time?" Colonel Yoon asked. "If all the resistance networks meet their production quotas, we should have approximately 200 combat-capable vessels ready when the fleet arrives. 200 ships against what intelligence suggested would be thousands. The odds were terrible, but humans had faced worse odds before and found ways to win." Dr. So-hyun Han approached from the prisoner interrogation area with a troubled expression. "Colonel, we have a problem. The Valkyrie prisoners are exhibiting strange behavior patterns." "Explain." "For weeks they have been growing more confident, expecting rescue from the main fleet. But in the last few days, several have become agitated and fearful again. They are talking about something they call the deep signal." Colonel Yoon frowned. None of the intelligence they had gathered mentioned anything called the deep signal. "What do they mean by that?" "I am not certain. But from what I can understand, it appears to be some kind of communication from beyond Valkyrie space. Something that is making their military command very nervous." The mystery deepened. When Hiren intercepted a series of coded transmissions between remaining Valkyrie forces on Earth, the messages were heavily encrypted and difficult to translate, but certain phrases kept appearing in multiple communications. "They keep referring to something called the Awakening," Hiren reported, "and there are references to multiple sector rebellions beginning simultaneously." The pieces began to come together during an interrogation session with Lieutenant Velkon, the communication officer they had captured months earlier. Dr. Han had been working patiently to gain his trust, and he was now more willing to discuss things that frightened him. "The deep signal came from the Andrelix sector," he revealed during questioning. 3 systems under Valkyrie control suddenly went silent. When scout ships were sent to investigate, they found the planets liberated and the occupation forces destroyed. "Liberated by whom?" Dr. Han asked. "By the species that had been conquered there. The Andrelix, the Keth, the Zephyrians. All of them rose up simultaneously and drove out Valkyrie forces using tactics they learned from studying Earth's resistance broadcasts. The implications were staggering. Earth's resistance had not only inspired rebellion on distant worlds, it had provided a practical guide for successful revolution against Valkyrie occupation. The Empire was facing the first coordinated multi-species rebellion in its history. "How many worlds are in rebellion?" Dr. Hahn pressed. The last report before communication was cut off mentioned 17 systems in active revolt, with disturbances reported in dozens more. Colonel Yoon absorbed this information with growing excitement. The strategic situation was far more complex than they had realized. The Valkyrie main fleet was not just coming to crush Earth's resistance. It was desperately trying to hold together an empire that was collapsing from within. "This changes everything," he told his command staff during their next planning meeting. "We are not facing a unified enemy coming to destroy us. We are facing a failing empire that is running out of resources to fight multiple wars simultaneously." Minji looked up from the tactical displays she had been studying. "If the Valkyrie are fighting rebellions across dozens of worlds, they cannot possibly send their entire fleet to Earth. They need to keep forces in reserve to deal with other threats." "Exactly," Colonel Yoon agreed, "which means the fleet heading toward Earth will be smaller than we expected. And it will be under tremendous pressure to achieve a quick victory, so forces can be redeployed elsewhere." The new intelligence completely changed their defensive strategy. Instead of preparing for a desperate last stand against overwhelming force, they were now planning to exploit enemy weaknesses and turn the battle into a recruitment opportunity. For the growing galactic rebellion, Junho entered the command center carrying a communication device they had never seen before. "This just arrived through our network from the European resistance," he said. "They claim it is a prototype long-range transmitter capable of reaching other star systems." Hyerin examined the device with growing excitement. "This is based on captured Valkyrie deep space communication technology, but the improvements are remarkable. With this, we could potentially coordinate with the rebellions on other worlds." "Do it," Colonel Yoon ordered immediately. It took 3 days to establish the first confirmed communication link with rebels fighting Valkyrie occupation in the Androlix sector. The voice that came through the transmitter spoke accented English learned from intercepted Earth broadcasts. "Earth resistance. This is Commander Thane of the Androlix Liberation Front. We have been monitoring your activities and learning from your tactics. Your question has become our battle cry. When the Valkyrie threaten us with destruction, we ask them, 'When does it start?' The communication link opened up possibilities that no one had imagined. Within days, they were in contact with resistance movements on 12 different worlds. Each group had adapted human tactics to their own species' strengths and planetary conditions, but all shared the same determination to drive out Valkyrie occupation forces. "We are coordinating simultaneous strikes," Commander Thane explained during a planning session conducted across multiple star systems. "When the Valkyrie main fleet moves toward Earth, they will leave other sectors weakly defended. That is when we hit them everywhere at once." The Galactic Rebellion was becoming a reality, with Earth serving as both inspiration and tactical headquarters. Hyerin worked around the clock to establish secure communication links with rebel groups, sharing intelligence and coordinating timing for maximum impact. But the most important discovery came from an unexpected source. During a routine interrogation, Sergeant Thekvar revealed information that changed the entire strategic picture. "The fleet coming to Earth is not just a military force," he admitted reluctantly. "It carries the Valkyrie High Command and most of our government officials. They are moving the seat of power closer to what they consider the primary threat." Dr. Hahn immediately understood the implications. They are not just sending a fleet to destroy Earth. They are relocating their entire leadership here because they believe controlling Earth is the key to stopping the rebellion. Which means, Colonel Yoon realized, that if we can destroy or capture that fleet, we can decapitate the entire Valkyrie Empire. The stakes had risen dramatically. The coming battle would not just determine Earth's survival. It would decide the fate of hundreds of subjugated worlds across the galaxy. News of the Valkyrie leadership's approach spread quickly through the resistance networks. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Human fighters who had been preparing for a desperate last stand now saw themselves as potential liberators of entire civilizations. "We are not just defending our world anymore," Minji told a gathering of resistance fighters in the underground shipyard. We are fighting for every species the Velkari have ever conquered, every world they have enslaved, every civilization they have destroyed. The response was electric. Recruitment surged as civilians volunteered for combat roles they had never considered. Production increased as workshops operated continuously to build weapons and ships. Training intensified as former military personnel prepared civilian volunteers for space combat. Most importantly, the coordination with other rebel worlds allowed for unprecedented strategic planning. While Earth prepared its defensive fleet, rebel forces on distant planets prepared to strike at Velkari supply lines and communication networks. The Velkari have never faced a coordinated multi-species rebellion, Commander Thane explained during a tactical briefing broadcast to all rebel worlds. Their entire military doctrine assumes they will fight one species at a time on individual planets. We are going to show them what happens when dozens of worlds fight back simultaneously. The plan that emerged from months of interspecies cooperation was breathtakingly ambitious. As the Velkari fleet approached Earth, rebel forces across the galaxy would launch simultaneous attacks on strategic targets. Supply depots, communication relays, military bases, and government installations would all come under assault at the same moment. The Velkari would find themselves fighting a galaxy-wide war with their leadership trapped near Earth and their forces scattered across hundreds of light years. When it starts, Minji said during a final strategy session, the entire galaxy will know that the age of Velkari domination is over. The waiting was almost over. Long-range sensors detected the approaching Velkari fleet still weeks away, but close enough now to provide detailed intelligence about their composition and capabilities. The enemy force was smaller than originally feared, but still represented a formidable challenge. However, the psychological profile of the Velkari leadership suggested they were under enormous pressure. Reports from across their empire described growing unrest, supply shortages, and military units stretched thin, trying to contain multiple rebellions. They are coming here expecting to fight a desperate human resistance, Colonel Yoon observed. They have no idea they are walking into a trap that has been months in the making. In the final weeks before the fleet's arrival, a constant stream of messages arrived from rebel groups across the galaxy. Each group reported readiness for coordinated action. Each species had its own way of saying the same thing: they were ready to fight. The Keth sent poetry about liberation written in their musical language. The Zephyrians transmitted mathematical equations that described the probability of Velkari defeat. The Androlics simply repeated Minji's question over and over: when does it start? As the Velkari fleet entered the outer solar system, Admiral Kreshtar reviewed intelligence reports from his flagship and felt growing unease. The humans should have been trying to negotiate by now, or at least showing signs of panic as they faced inevitable destruction. Instead, his sensors detected unprecedented activity throughout the human solar system. Ships were moving in organized formations. Communication networks were operating at maximum capacity. Energy signatures suggested massive industrial operations running at full power. This does not match the expected behavior patterns, he told his tactical officer. Conquered species normally show signs of desperation as liberation fleets approach. These humans appear to be preparing for something. He had no way of knowing that across the galaxy, on 17 different worlds, resistance fighters were also asking the same question that had begun with a human woman's defiant response to an alien threat. The galaxy was about to find out when it would start. Admiral Kreshatar stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the tactical display showing Earth in the distance. The blue planet looked peaceful and vulnerable, but his sensors told a different story. Human activity throughout the solar system suggested a level of organization that should have been impossible for a conquered species. Status report, he commanded. Long-range scans detect approximately 200 human vessels in various formations around their planet. His tactical officer reported, energy signatures indicate they have successfully reverse-engineered our propulsion and weapons technology. 200 ships, the admiral mused. Against our fleet of 800. They cannot possibly believe they can win a direct engagement. What Admiral Kreshatar did not know was that the human fleet was not planning a direct engagement. 3 months of coordination with rebel forces across the galaxy had produced a strategy that the Velkari military had never encountered before. Minji Park sat in the command chair of the lead human vessel, a ship they had named Liberation. Around her, a crew of former Korean Air Force pilots, Naval officers and civilian volunteers prepared for the most important battle in human history. "All ships report ready," came the voice of Captain Jun-Ho Kim from the attack vessel Defiance. "Coordination with rebel fleets confirmed. We are ready to begin on your signal." Colonel Yoon's voice came through the communication system from the command ship Seoul's Pride. "Remember, our objective is not to destroy their fleet. Our objective is to capture it and end this war." The strategy was audacious even by human standards. Instead of fighting a conventional space battle, they would use their superior maneuverability and knowledge of Velkari psychology to force the enemy fleet into a position where surrender was preferable to annihilation. Higher in, "Status on our galactic coordination network? All rebel fleets standing by," Hyerin replied from her position at the communication station. 17 worlds ready to strike simultaneously. The moment we engage the Velkari fleet, the entire galaxy will know the rebellion has begun. On the Velkari flagship, Admiral Kreshitar received the first indication that this battle would be unlike anything his forces had experienced. Long-range communications suddenly went silent as relay stations across the galaxy stopped responding. "Admiral," his communication officer reported with growing alarm, "we are receiving emergency transmissions from multiple sectors. Coordinated attacks on our installations throughout the Empire. Supply depots destroyed. Communication networks disrupted. Garrison forces under assault." The Admiral felt a cold realization creep through his mind. The humans had not been preparing for a desperate last stand. They had been coordinating a galaxy-wide rebellion, timed to coincide with his fleet's arrival at Earth. "How many sectors are affected?" "All of them, sir. Every world under Velkari control is reporting simultaneous uprisings." The psychological impact on Velkari forces was immediate and devastating. For centuries, their military doctrine had been built on the assumption that they would always fight isolated enemies on individual worlds. The concept of coordinated multi-species rebellion was completely outside their experience. Minji watched the enemy fleet's formation begin to waver as Velkari ships received distress calls from across their empire. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "All human vessels begin the operation. Let them know when it starts." The human fleet did not charge directly at the Velkari formation. Instead, they spread out in a complex pattern that took advantage of their superior maneuverability. Smaller, faster ships began darting between Velkari vessels, while larger ships positioned themselves to cut off retreat. Routes. Admiral Kreshitar found his fleet surrounded by enemies who refused to fight. According to established tactical doctrine, human ships would appear, strike quickly, and disappear before his heavy weapons could target them effectively. Meanwhile, his communication with the Velkari homeworld remained completely severed. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the humans are not trying to destroy our ships. They appear to be targeting our engines and weapon systems while avoiding critical hull damage. They are trying to capture our fleet intact," the Admiral realized with growing horror. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded Velkari military history. Human ships swarmed around the alien fleet like predators hunting prey, methodically disabling enemy vessels while broadcasting demands for surrender in perfect Velkari language. "Attention, Velkari fleet," Minji's voice carried across all frequencies. "You are surrounded and cut off from reinforcement. Your empire is in rebellion on 17 worlds. Your homeworld has lost contact with its outlying territories. Surrender now, and your crews will be treated according to the laws of warfare." Admiral Kreshitar watched in disbelief as his tactical display showed Velkari ships being systematically disabled. The humans were using captured alien technology more effectively than his own forces, having spent months studying and improving upon Velkari designs. More disturbing was the psychological warfare being conducted on all frequencies. Human broadcasts described successful rebellions across the galaxy, complete with intercepted Velkari communications confirming the scope of the coordinated uprising. "The age of Velkari dominance is over," the human commander announced. "You have a choice. Surrender and help us build a new galaxy based on cooperation instead of conquest, or be remembered as the last defenders of a failed empire." The turning point came when Captain Jun-Ho Kim's attack squadron successfully disabled the flagship's main engines. Admiral Kreshitar found himself trapped in a powerless vessel surrounded by human ships bristling with weapons that had once belonged to his own fleet. "Admiral," his communication officer said quietly, We are receiving surrender requests from over half our fleet. Ship commanders are reporting that their crews refuse to continue fighting. The psychological impact of simultaneous rebellions across the galaxy had broken Velkari morale. Soldiers who had believed in their empire's invincibility now faced the reality that their civilization was collapsing around them. Admiral Kreshitar made the hardest decision of his military career. Signal general surrender to all vessels. The space battle above Earth ended not with explosions and destruction, but with the largest mass surrender in galactic history. Over 600 Velkari warships lowered their weapons and prepared to be boarded by human crews. In the prisoner-holding area of the Liberation, Sergeant Thakovar listened to reports of the battle's outcome with complete shock. The threats he had made months earlier about planetary destruction and human extinction now seemed like the raven. Because of a madman. Dr. Sohyun Han found him in his cell, staring at the wall with empty eyes. "You asked the wrong question," she told him gently. "When you threatened us with your fleet and demanded to know if we were ready to die, Minji asked when it would start. You thought she was asking about our destruction. She was actually asking about yours." The captured Velkari officer said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. The empire he had served his entire life no longer existed. In its place, a galactic alliance was being born from the ashes of rebellion and the courage of species who had learned to fight back. News of the victory spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On 17 different worlds, species that had suffered under Velkari rule for generations watched the recordings of human ships accepting the surrender of the Imperial fleet. But the real victory was not military. It was psychological. The galaxy had learned that even the most powerful empire could be defeated if enough species stood together and refused to accept oppression as inevitable. 6 months later, Minji Park stood before the newly formed Galactic Liberation Council as Earth's representative. The council included species from dozens of worlds, all working together to build a new civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. "The Velkari asked us when our destruction would begin," she told the assembled delegates. "We showed them when their empire would end. The lesson for all of us is simple. When faced with tyranny, we should never ask if we can win. We should ask when we start fighting." The former Velkari territories were being transformed into autonomous regions governed by their native populations. Former Imperial military units were being integrated into a new galactic defense force, dedicated to protecting freedom rather than enforcing conquest. Admiral Kreshitar, now a prisoner-turned-advisor, worked with human strategists to dismantle the remaining elements of Imperial control. His knowledge of Velkari military structure was invaluable in locating hidden bases and weapons caches throughout the galaxy. "Your species did something that should have been impossible," he told Colonel Yoon during one of their planning sessions. "You turned the hunters into the hunted using nothing but determination and refusal to accept defeat." "That is what humans do," Colonel Yoon replied simply. "We do not surrender. We do not give up. And we never fight alone when we can fight together." The galaxy had learned that lesson well. Species that had been enemies for centuries now worked side by side in the great task of rebuilding civilization. The Velkari Empire's legacy of fear and oppression was being replaced by something unprecedented, a truly cooperative galactic community. And in the archives of every member world, the story was recorded of how it all began with a simple question asked by a human woman who refused to be intimidated by threats of extinction. When does it start? It had already started, and the galaxy would never be the same. 2 years had passed since the fall of the Velkari Empire, and the galaxy was learning what peace looked like. Minji Park walked through the corridors of Unity Station, the massive space facility that served as headquarters for the Galactic Liberation Council. The station had been built from the combined technology of dozens of species, each contributing their best innovations to create something greater than any single world could have achieved alone. Through the observation windows, she could see ships from 17 different worlds docked at the station. Sleek Andrelix vessels with their curved hulls floated next to angular Keth exploration ships. Human fighters shared berths with Zephyrian research craft. Former Velkari warships, now painted with the colors of the Liberation Fleet, patrolled the surrounding space. "The morning briefing is ready to begin," Captain Junho Kim said as he approached from the command center. He now wore the uniform of the Galactic Defense Force, a symbol of cooperation that would have been impossible during the dark days of Velkari rule. The briefing room was filled with representatives from member worlds, each species contributing their unique perspective to the challenges of building a new galactic civilization. Commander Thane of the Androlix sat next to Dr. Sohyun Han, who had become the Council's expert on interspecies psychology. Colonel Yoon, now serving as Earth's military advisor, reviewed reports from the outer territories. Status report from the former Valkyrie core worlds, began Ambassador Kalex, a Zephyrian whose people had been among the first to join the rebellion. The transition to self-governance is proceeding better than expected. Most former imperial colonies have established democratic councils and are requesting membership in the Liberation Alliance. The transformation had not been without challenges. Centuries of imperial rule had left many species unprepared for self-governance. Some worlds had descended into chaos when Valkyrie authority collapsed. Others had been invaded by opportunistic neighbors seeking to expand their own territories. What about the resistance movements? Minji asked. Are there still Valkyrie loyalists causing problems? Isolated incidents only, Commander Thane reported. Most remaining Imperial forces have either surrendered or joined local defense units. The few holdouts are concentrated in the Outer Rim territories where communication is difficult. Yaron Lee, now serving as the Council's Chief Technology Officer, brought up a holographic display showing the galaxy's current political situation. Green areas represented stable member worlds of the Liberation Alliance. Yellow areas showed territories still in transition. Red areas marked regions where conflict continued. The good news is that over 80% of former Valkyrie territory is now peaceful and self-governing, she explained. The remaining problem areas are mostly isolated systems with limited strategic value. And what about Earth? Asked Ambassador Kalex. Colonel Yoon smiled. Earth is rebuilding rapidly. The Korean peninsula has been completely reconstructed, and Seoul is once again a major population center. The resistance tunnels have been converted into an underground transportation system that connects the entire city. The recovery had been remarkable. With access to advanced alien technology and support from grateful allied worlds, Earth's war-damaged cities had been rebuilt better than before. The orbital shipyards that once produced warships now manufactured civilian craft for exploration and trade. But the most significant change was not technological. It was cultural. The Integration Program Report, Dr. Han announced, referring to the project that had become her life's work. We now have permanent cultural exchanges active between 43 worlds. Human students are studying on Androlix universities. Keth artists are teaching sculpture techniques on Earth. Zephyrian mathematicians are working with human engineers to develop new propulsion systems. The program had been controversial at first. Many species had been reluctant to share their knowledge and culture with former enemies. But the success of human-alien cooperation during the war had proven that different civilizations could work together for mutual benefit. The most interesting development, Dr. Han continued, is the emergence of what we are calling hybrid cultures. Young people from different species are creating art, music, and literature that combines elements from multiple worlds. Minji had seen examples of this during her travels throughout the Alliance territory. Human musicians collaborated with Androlix poets to create songs that could only be understood by listening with both human ears and Androlix sound organs. Keth sculptors worked with human architects to design buildings that were both beautiful and functional, according to the aesthetic principles of multiple species. What about military integration? She asked. Proceeding ahead of schedule, Colonel Yoon reported. The first mixed species crew is ready to begin patrol duties next month. The ship will have human Androlix, Keth, and Zephyrian officers working together. The integration fleet had been the most ambitious project of the new alliance. Instead of each species maintaining separate military forces, they were creating joint units that combined the best tactical knowledge and technology from all member worlds. There is one issue that requires Council attention, Commander Thane said with a serious expression. We have received contact attempts from beyond the former Valkyrie borders. Unknown civilizations that are asking questions about what happened to the Empire. This was the challenge that everyone had been expecting, but hoping to avoid. The Valkyrie Empire had been one of several major powers in the galaxy. Its sudden collapse had created a power vacuum that other civilizations were certain to notice. What kind of contact attempts? Minji asked. Mostly exploration vessels probing former Imperial territory. Some appear to be traders looking for new markets. Others seem to be scouts gathering intelligence about our defensive capabilities. Any hostile actions? Not yet. But several of these unknown civilizations appear to have military capabilities similar to what the Velkari possessed at their peak. If they decide we are a threat or an opportunity, we could face new conflicts. The briefing room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. They had spent 2 years building a peaceful alliance based on cooperation and mutual respect. The idea that they might have to fight another war was deeply troubling. Recommendations? Minji asked. Ambassador Kalek spoke first. The Zephyrian Council believes we should make peaceful contact with these unknown civilizations. Off. Her trade agreements and cultural exchanges show them that our alliance is based on cooperation, not conquest. The Androlik's perspective is more cautious, Commander Thane added. We should strengthen our defenses first, then approach these unknowns from a position of strength. The galaxy has learned that weakness invites aggression. Colonel Yoon offered a third option. Perhaps we should do both. Prepare for defense while actively seeking peaceful contact. The Liberation Alliance represents something new in galactic politics. We should give other civilizations a chance to understand what we have built before assuming they will be hostile. Dr. Han raised an important point. We should also consider what we have learned about interspecies psychology. The Velkari were aggressive because their culture valued conquest and domination. Other species might have completely different motivations and goals. The discussion continued for hours as representatives debated different approaches to the challenge of first contact with unknown civilizations. It was the kind of problem that would have been impossible during the Velkari era, when all decisions were made by imperial commanders based solely on military considerations. Finally, Minji called for a decision. I propose we establish a first contact committee with representatives from all member species. We will develop protocols for peaceful communication while simultaneously strengthening our defensive capabilities. We prepare for both peace and war, but we always try peace first. The vote was unanimous. The Liberation Alliance would face the unknown future the same way they had defeated the Velkari Empire, together. After the meeting, Minji walked alone to the station's memorial section. Here, holographic displays showed the faces and names of everyone who had died during the War of Liberation. Humans, Androlics, Keth, Zephyrian, and even some Velkari who had switched sides to fight for freedom. She stopped at a display showing the underground resistance fighters who had died in Seoul during the early days of the occupation. Their sacrifice had made everything that followed possible. The question you asked changed everything, came a voice from behind her. Minji turned to see Admiral Kreshtar, the former Velkari fleet commander who now served as a military advisor to the Alliance. His cooperation during the transition had been invaluable, and many former enemies had come to respect his honest efforts to help build a better galaxy. When Sergeant Thekvar threatened your world with destruction and you asked when it would start, you were really asking when the galaxy would stop accepting tyranny as inevitable, the former admiral continued. The answer was immediately. The question was not planned, Minji admitted. I was just angry and tired of being afraid. But I am glad it inspired others. It did more than inspire. It taught the galaxy that the right question can be more powerful than any weapon. They stood together in silence, looking at the memorial displays, former enemies paying respect to those who had died to create a better future. What do you think about these unknown civilizations? Minji asked. Admiral Kreshtar considered carefully before answering. The Velkari Empire made the mistake of believing that all species would react the same way to conquest and oppression. You proved them wrong. Now the Liberation Alliance must avoid making the same mistake about these newcomers. Meaning, do not assume they will be like the Velkari. Do not assume they will be like humans. Give them a chance to show you who they really are before deciding how to respond. It was good advice from someone who understood the cost of making wrong assumptions about other species. As Minji walked back toward the command center, she reflected on how much had changed since that day in the ruins of Seoul, when she had asked 4 simple words that changed galactic history. The galaxy was no longer divided between conquerors and conquered. It was becoming a community of equals working together to build something better than any of them could achieve alone. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And they would always remember the lesson learned in Earth's underground tunnels. When faced with tyranny, the right response is not fear or surrender. The right response is a simple question. When does it start? The answer, as the galaxy had learned, was always the same. Now.